All right, I'm going to go ahead and get things fired up here for us. So I'm going to reintroduce our panel because we've had a couple of minutes here. So this is actually going to be really, really fun, guys. We're very excited about this. We call this our Influencers Roundtable. Should be a great discussion. The members of our panel are, we've got Chris Skaggs from Code Monkeys. We've got Christopher Price from iConsole.tv, and then from both from Lost Decade Games, rather. We have Geoff Blair and Matt Hackett. Give them a round of applause. Yes, nicely done. And we are very excited to have our moderator here. We are dubbing him the Geek on YouTube, and his name is Chris Pirillo. Give it up for Chris.
Hey. Usually B plus though, not really B plus Geek. Hello. I was told there was no dress code, so this is what I ended up with. I am not a developer, but as I was saying pretty much to every one of the panelists, at least a few minutes ago, developers are rock stars to me because I cannot do the things that developers can do. And I'm very excited to be a part of this panel, if only because I run on so many platforms these days. I'm not tied to any one platform. So to be moderating a panel about cross-platform gaming and code, it makes a lot of sense for me because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think that's the beauty of games. What does it matter what platform it runs on necessarily? If it runs and it plays well, and it's a good experience. So yeah, I'm just a geek. That's all. I was recognized the other day for being from the internet, and so yeah, Google me or Bing me. You know, if you're from Microsoft, Alta Vista, Dogpile, Lycos, if you want. There you go. So. You don't need to know about me, but I figured we could go into some deeper introductions, brief introductions with each of the panelists. We can start with Matt here to my right, and then just pass the conch on down the line. So just tell us who you are, your background, your interest in cross-platform gaming, why you accepted being on this panel, and your favorite video game character of all time.
I can do that.
All right.
So I am Matt Hackett. I'm one of the two co-founders of Lost Decade Games. We've been a full-time independent game studio for over 2 years, and we make HTML5 games and nothing but. And our current game is a Wizard's Lizard. It's available now cross-platform on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And my favorite game character of all time is right here on my arm. This is Ultros, the octopus from the Final Fantasy series. And there you go.
Great. My name is Geoff Blair. I'm the other co-founder of Lost Decade Games. And at LDG, I handle a lot of the kind of game engine and rendering work. It's kind of my passion to make HTML5 run really fast across various different platforms. My favorite video game character of all time is the Lizard Man. He has appeared in multiple games. First of all is Shining Force, which is one of my absolute favorite games from Sega Genesis. He's a great enemy. And of course, Lizard Man from Soul Calibur, another one of my favorite games. There you go.
Well, I'm Christopher Price, founder of iConsole.tv. We're building the high-end Android gaming and desktop platform, which we'll be doing a major announcement of next month, but of course we're demoing here at the show. My favorite gaming character of all time, I gotta go with this classic Sonic the Hedgehog, and of course, Sonic CD.
I'm Chris Skaggs. I'm the founder of Soma Games and Code Monkeys. We started with web, which was by necessity cross-platform, and that kind of moved us into mobile, which was more cross-platform, and that just keeps on going up the chain. And it's a nice way to kind of chip your way up the thing. And I'm going to go with Mr. Do. You remember the guy with the bouncing snowballs? That guy was pretty cool.
That was.
Yeah, my favorite video game character was the Dot in Atari's Adventure. That was mine. Love the graphics on that, just stellar. The frame rate was amazing too, way back in the day. So, and just so you know, we have 3 Chris's up here, but I don't think anyone's going to reference me, so we're just going to clarify Chris on the end and Christopher next to Chris. And so that's how we're going to clarify that. And I was told, Chris, that you were going to be singing your answers. What happened with that?
That's correct, my friend.
Okay, there we go. That's good enough. We don't need to turn it into American Idol. So I hear the term cross-platform all the time, but I think it means something different to everybody. And so whoever's holding onto the conch can start. I guess that would be...
That would be me.
Yes, great. Fantastic.
Yes.
So when you hear cross-platform, what does it mean to you, or how do you use it specifically in how you're developing?
Well, it means basically being on multiple devices within any given category, right? Like Whether you're targeting desktop or mobile, being on several different operating systems within that category, I think would be considered cross-platform. For us, we define being cross-platform as the major desktop operating systems, Windows, Mac, Linux. You could also classify it as, Android and iOS and mobile, Tizen maybe. And so to me, it just means that you're targeting multiple operating systems or flavors of devices within, your kind of chosen market.
Any other additions?
So when people come to me, they're often asking about Android on x86, and a lot of people view that as a completely different platform from Android on ARM. And there's some of that's misconception, some of that's valid, but I think from a real hard coding perspective, people sometimes have to have misconceptions there. You have to explain that Android on x86 is the same as Android on ARM, but yeah, I think for consumers, it's certainly the old adage: Windows versus Mac, Xbox versus PlayStation.
I know from our side, part of the cross-platform conversation is about market. It's about the ability to have your title that you really busted your chops on for who knows how many months or weeks or years, and you want it to see as many eyeballs as possible without having to redo it all over the case. But I would say in the past, that has largely been a conversation of the least possible work to get in front of the least eyeballs, and I think that one goal isn't deep enough to be meaningful anymore.
And hold on to the mic for just a second, because we were having a conversation before the panel, and then Matt, if you want to add to something, you can. I think it's very interesting how you approach cross-platform development. It's focusing on the game, not so much the platform in terms of that marketing.
Yeah, so probably by the time you're done with any particular game, you're about ready to throw up. Like, you don't want to see it anymore, you don't want to touch it anymore, so the least amount of work that's necessary to go from, say, iOS to Android or from Mac to PC. That's really a genuine business goal. But the bigger business goal is that I want to distribute it. Like, digital distribution is like the huge, gigantic mega lever that makes indie gaming real right now. And so obviously the more eyeballs I could do, the more devices I can reach, that's well worth going into. I think one of the tricks that we are trying to get into, though, is it's not enough just to make it play on a Mac and on a PC, but especially as you go from form factor, like I want it to be on a desktop and on a mobile, and in which case I want the form factor to change the experience and to really optimize what it's good for.
Anything to add, Matt?
To me, a really great example of a cross-platform game is Plants vs. Zombies, because everybody here played Plants vs. Zombies, probably, and it's great because it's like you play it on Android, you play it on iPad, it's available on Xbox 360, it's available on Mac, Windows, Linux, all that good stuff. But I'm not sure if everyone feels that way. Some people think that cross-platform, to them, it really just means like on desktop or on mobile. I think they're both fair.
I know, I'm hearing the feedback too. I don't know if it's the 2 notes.
It shows the ambiguity, of like how even just cross-platform means different things to different people.
So this is a softball question, I know, but I'm still curious. Probably the biggest cross-platform game in recent months, Flappy Bird. And it's still available on Windows Phone for the people running on Windows Phone, apparently. And the developers now come out and said that it may come back. What do you, each developer, attribute to being a success of Flappy Bird? Because I'd consider it a success by just about every measurement.
I think it's hard to say, and I think that's one of the things that the development community has been asking themselves. There's a lot of people that make mobile games, and there's a lot of people that try and get those games to go viral like that game did. And part of it is timing, and part of it is like a really solid mechanic, and then part of it is just that getting that foothold with enough users to where it starts to go viral. And so I think I'm not saying it's luck, but a lot of it is just being at the right place, the right time, and having the right product that hits people in the right spot.
I'm willing to sum it up in the word luck. I played a lot of games just like Flappy Bird that came before Flappy Bird. I think sometimes the marketplace craves a game type that's been out there. They just want a really polished version of that game. And if you can get that version to market at the right time, you're going to be very successful. I think there's a lot that's been oddball about Flappy Bird's path that makes it kind of an outlier. I think that's safe to say, though. So yeah, I wish them all the best, but it's an odd one.
If I were to add anything, Polygon Magazine had an article, and their title was something like "Flappy Bird proves that none of us know what the hell we're doing."
Yes.
And I think that's. It seems to me like the what's going to make something viral is so much lightning in a bottle, and Flappy Bird to me only proves that. Not I need to make my Flappy Bird clone.
Well, thank you for not jumping on that bandwagon. Then. There seems to be a million clones.
Yeah.
I don't know if Matt, if you wanted to answer that. You're good. You're good on the flap. It's been flapped out. So we're going to flap on. And actually, I'm curious to know. Again, context. I'm not a developer, but I watch things. At a very close distance because I read them in the web browser. This morning, I believe, even though they've been working on it for quite some time, WebCL is pretty much being pushed out as a port of OpenCL, specifically to get better performance in opening up GPU and CPU performance, multi-core performance in the browser. Pretty exciting in terms of development, but that's not really happening yet. There's a Firefox plugin. What do you see as some of the bigger trends that have been happening over the past year within the world of cross-platform development? Maybe some of the tools that you guys use independently to help make that transition from one platform to another. Maybe some things that you see coming down the road you're excited about.
Sure, I'll take that one first from the platform perspective. First, we love HTML5. I think that the conventional wisdom that you have to decide between native or HTML5, for us, that's a non-issue. Anything HTML5 can do great, we love and we'll make better, and we'll make stronger. So I think, yeah, it's great that HTML5 keeps strengthening and getting these new components like WebCL. On the Android side of things, I look out towards, Android getting better with 3D and virtual reality and stuff like that will take HTML years to do. That's what Android should be doing well. And on the cross-platform side, on the native side of things, I think the middleware has just gotten so much better. It's now really to the point where you can have a game build for Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and now Android on the same code base. I'm not even including iConsole in that, where the same code stack can run on tablet and discrete console. The middleware has just gotten a lot better.
It seems to me that at one point platforms differentiated themselves on purpose, like they were trying to be, this is the special whatever. It was the Xbox platform, the PS2 platform, whatever. And increasingly, like here's this big sign for Havoc and their Project Anarchy. That to me is one of the signals that where AAA gaming is seeing that there's a real value in the indie level where cross-platform is the way it works. And the ability to get more and more people into that space, and frankly at lower levels, both the time and the effort they put into it, and frankly often the skill level and the education, being able to make that, people who just want to make games and they don't want to study 13 years of C++, that kind of stuff is what I think is the big play, because it means that millions of people are participating, and that started probably with iOS, and Unity got obviously into that big thing, and we're big Unity fans, but it's that thing, I learn one IDE, and I can spit it out to 30 different platforms. That's really powerful.
I think for us being HTML5 developers, a lot of it comes down to the tooling, and you're really seeing HTML5 tools kind of crop up and mature over the last couple of years, and obviously, there's a lot of stuff to come pretty soon, but I think that Unity announcing HTML5 support is a big thing for HTML5 in general, because it means it's a legitimate target that people want to hit. People want to be able to play games in their browser with one click. And so, just the fact that they've added that support, means that it's a desirable place to be. And so, you've got a lot of these people like Unity adding support. We have a lot of other people in the ecosystem, PlayCanvas, Luday, Intel with XDK, trying to make it easier for developers to take their JavaScript code and their HTML code that they write for the web browser and bring it to all these different platforms. And so, I think that the big trend here is going to be seeing that continue to evolve.
Matt, anything to add? Nope. Well, you're a great panelist. And you're the, I would say, the most artistic one as well, seemingly, at least on the arm. Because, nice shirts and everything, guys, but this arm trumps.
We have all the art for our games, too.
Oh, well, that stands to reason.
I have 40 strands of flare on my badge right now. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes.
That's fair. I didn't want to start a fight that way. I'm trying to start a fight another way here. Hybrid application, that's a new term for me. Again, not being steeped in code. Everyone may have a different definition. The definition may be similar, but in terms of hybrid applications, I can only imagine what it would be. But are there compromises? Because it seems to me that the word hybrid almost implies a compromise on one side or another. So your thoughts on hybrid apps, where they are, where they're going?
So a hybrid app, as I understand it, would be something that was written in a native language like C++, but then it also has web components. And I think a good example would be, say, Steam application. So it's written in C++, but it also has web components. Like you can open up web content while you're still in Steam. And then I believe it was Wolfire Games had their game Overgrowth they've been working on forever, and it's like this beautiful 3D rendered game. But their UI is done actually using web technologies. It's like CSS3. It's got great transitions, and like they get stuff like scrolling and like creating elements like buttons. They get all that for free without having to code all that in the native language. So they get like the kind of the best of both worlds. You get a fast 3D game, and then you also have your great UI that the web does and the DOM does really well.
So hybrid apps are great if people want to put. I get 8 different hybrid references. I gotta be honest. I mean, what you're describing in terms of hybrid, great, all for it, no problems there. Most of my hybrid app questions are, do I have to make a hybrid app where I have an ARM payload and an x86 payload? So there are a lot of different hybrid topics, but yeah, people want to mix HTML5 and Dalvik and NDK on Android. That's great.
That's fair. Okay. The idea that HTML5, it seems to be a buzzword, right? HTML5. Games run with HTML5, but is this going to be, not necessarily just the future of gaming, we're talking about the present of gaming. Is it ever going to match, say, native code? If so, how do you think it's going to happen? If not, your thoughts? Speed, performance, in terms of...
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do Flappy Bird, HTML5 is going to match Objective-C. It's going to match Android Runtime or Dalvik, depending on what version of Android you have. There's going to be an equalizer. I think the onus on native code is to think ahead. And we had that initially with stuff like Flash. We've gotten over that hurdle, and I think that native is always going to have better performance in the cutting edge. And HTML5 is the great equalizer, and I think both are very good. It depends on what your target audience is. Do you want that hardcore gamer that wants that visual that looks as good as a $30 million production movie, or do you want the casual game that I can play just as well on my laptop as I do on my tablet or on my phone?
Excuse me, I would draw also, there's a notion that between HTML5 as a development environment and also it's different than where it's being used. So for example, showing HTML5 in a browser is different than rendering an HTML5 UI, for example, inside of a different app. And so you have to pull the thoughts apart just a little bit. The benefit of making a UI in HTML5 I think is huge. Like you said, you get all this stuff for free. You have so much more accessibility and so much more flexibility. That's a giant benefit over trying to make UI buttons in a different code base. And so I love from the hybrid conversation when I can use that as part of my app. But it's confusing because we're not using a browser in that case, right? You're sort of rendering it in some other way. And those hybrids and that technology I think is fantastic. And it's not going away. I think frankly it's better than the alternatives, and it's only likely to get better.
Yeah, I think also like to echo that, it really depends on your context. I think a lot about development is choosing the right tools for the job. And in certain cases, HTML5 is, something that provides a lot of benefits for what you're doing, and in some cases, obviously, a different approach is needed. I think with HTML5, though, it's really awesome to see that all these things you can do in the browser now that you weren't able to do even a year or two ago. The WebGL announcement from Unity, watching these great Unreal demos running in the browser, that is really, really close to something that you would see in a AAA game. And it doesn't even have to be casual games that you're playing. Like the game that we're making is a hardcore Twitch-based, milliseconds matter kind of game, and it's not 3D.
Wait, Twitch as in Twitch TV?
No, Twitch as in Twitch controls.
Okay, just making sure. I wanted to clarify there because
This isn't Twitch Plays our game.
got it.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to say that for certain classes of things, HTML5 does a really great job.
Yeah, but on that front, I think the two topics are not mutually exclusive. Like for example, Twitch TV. Are you going to be able to do Twitch TV on an HTML5 game in a Chrome instance? Probably not. Are you going to be able to do that with an Android instance of an HTML5 app? Probably. And that's where the line starts to blur, where HTML5 dovetails back into being a runtime environment on top of an app. And I think that's where Android will be strong. A lot of people ask me, are we trying to unseat Chromebook or Chrome OS? And I think maybe.
Anything that?
Right? Now, in terms of games or even apps in general, performance is important for me as a user, and I'm curious to know as developers where performance ranks for you in development. How do you guys optimize for performance in a game? Not the overall experience, but specifically perf.
So when you talk about games, performance is usually really important. And sometimes it's more important than others, but in almost any game you play, you want it to be responsive and you want the animations to look smooth. And so anytime you're making a game, you're always concerned about performance, I think. Because even a casual puzzle game, if it doesn't feel good when you place the pieces down and the pieces animate, you're going to feel like it's a bad experience.
So how do you optimize for it? How do you...
So the way that we optimize for it is just by, trying to find the best ways to get the most performance out of the technology stack that we've chosen, which is HTML5. So we spend a lot of time investigating, JavaScript performance techniques, Canvas performance techniques. I mean, the two big bottlenecks that we usually run into are going to be how long does it take to draw stuff to the screen using the Canvas API, and how long does it take for our mathematical operations to, happen over this giant loop that's running every single game frame. And so the way that we do that, honestly, is just a lot of trial and error, a lot of reading, trying to figure out the best practices from, other peers in our community. But yeah, it is just trying things out, benchmarking, changing, and repeating.
So Geoff and I, working together at Lost Decade Games, have kind of a dynamic. He's the low-level model guy, and he makes everything fast. And then I come in and I add sprites and graphics and particles and layers and parallax, and I make the games very slow. And then that makes Geoff's job harder. But it's kind of like it's a good balance, Like I add a bunch of stuff, and then he optimizes. And our developer environment is actually just the Chrome browser. That's where we're creating our games. Like we ship it differently, but we work in the Chrome browser. And it's got these great profiling tools. Like Geoff he'll see all my particles and stuff come in, and then he'll run the profiler, and he'll be like, I see what the bottleneck is. And then he just focuses on the stuff that really matters. Like you could go in and you could optimize every single for loop doing just game logic that's not really it's not a bottleneck, right? But you focus on the things that matter, and you can eventually get to that point where the game just starts to, you stop noticing, the game just feels great. Like you get immersed easier, and you're not noticing any frame drops or anything. It's an iterative process. It takes a lot of time.
So my optimization problems are much different than most people's. When people bring their game to me, even if it's like 100% ARM code, it vsync locks at 60 frames per second pretty much instantly when they hand me an Android APK. And the question I get asked is, okay, how do we get Android to do more awesome stuff with all this extra horsepower when you go from an ARM chip that's 1/20th the power of an Intel Core i5 with a GPU like an HD 5000 or an Iris? And the first thing I ask the game developer is, well, didn't you downsample your graphics? Didn't you downsample your textures? You had to work on that tabular phone. Say, yeah, I've got like 2 gigabyte textures back on my hard drive. I say, okay, go grab those, put them into the game, and see if it still runs at 60 frames per second. And I think that's the first step, is that we're taking the limiters off when you go from Android on tablet to Android on supercomputer, desktop, laptop, gaming, high-performance gaming console. We give the artists freedom to put in the effects that they envision rather than the effects that they're limited to by the hardware.
So if the nature of your question is just looking for techniques, what kind of...
Yeah, but specifically, like, what do you, I mean, is there a certain tool that you use? I mean, you talk about Chrome browser helping you with the HTML5 games.
So inside the Unity IDE, there's a lot of tools that give you profiling for the number of draw calls, the amount of CPU usage. And so a lot of the times you're just looking for that same kind of idea of where's the bottleneck. And so often draw calls are a big deal. Polygons obviously are a big deal. You want to make sure that you're using your texture atlases in a smart way so that you can call out graphics that you don't need. And it's always a give and take. I think that we start a little bit like you, like let's just throw everything we can at the stupid thing and kill it, and then kind of scale back from there. It's less intuitive to go the other way. Like if you build iteratively, most likely you're going to undershoot it, and so we kind of start big and then scale back.
So there's a saying when you're writing software, it's make it work, make it pretty, make it fast. And so you got to avoid premature optimization. Like you said, really target the places where your optimization is going to make a big difference, because that's where you're going to get the bang for the buck.
So in terms of moving one game or a game from one platform to another, I mean, especially if it's been a hurdle and it wasn't as easy, what has been the easiest experience for you, or what has been the worst? So you can either go best, worst, or both in terms of porting.
In terms of porting. So one of our earlier games was a strategy role-playing game called Lava Blade, and it was on Mac and it was on Windows. And so Intel actually has an open source project called Node WebKit, and that's what we use. And basically what it is just a wrapper for WebKit, and also has Node in there. And that really enabled us to, like, we now have Linux in our stack. And I lost my train of thought, so you go.
I think with our goal dealing with HTML5 is to not have to port hardly at all. Yes. Our goal is to be able to take our HTML5 code and put it in places and have it just work. And so I think that one of the best porting experiences we've had is with Cocoon.js from Lude, because essentially it's not a browser, but it still runs your JavaScript code against a Canvas API like Graphics Stack and gives you really good performance.
So that's what's so great about using Intel's Node WebKit, is we have teams working on Chromium. Like Google actively works on Chromium, and they have teams that do their best to make it so that our game runs well on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And for us to be able to benefit from them, that's great, because we really don't spend our time on cross-platform. We don't spend much time in Windows, on Mac, or Linux. Nowhere. We just focus on Node WebKit. Like there's edge cases, of course, like Gamepad doesn't work on Linux because of driver issues or whatever. But because there's other people working on this software, the cross-platform development's done by other people. So it's almost a non-issue for us.
So when we started 18 months ago, really engineering iConsole.tv and all the stuff we're going to be announcing next month, we had nothing. I mean, we had no apps working. We had AOSP, the apps that come with Android. And we were dealing with an environment where the Android browser was powered by WebKit, but Google had Chromium on Android, but they wouldn't share with us the whole source code. They'd share with us some of the source code, and they still won't share all the source code. Things have improved, and I think Android has matured to the point that it's a much easier process. We now have Unreal, we now have Havoc, we now have almost all the middleware platforms working on our stack. And for the Unity developers out there, check back next month.
One of our best porting experience was actually going from native OpenGL for iOS into Flash. Now it goes back several years, and we should all have a little moment of silence for Flash. But that one was so easy and painless, and it surprised us how easy that was. And then one of our worst was going from iOS to HTML5 on a simple solitaire game, and it killed us. We couldn't get the stupid thing to work to save our lives.
Wow. All right, now we've talked, and I think, Christopher, you kind of touched upon this, at least specifically with Android. How do you mitigate versions? And we can be talking about your platform of choice, whatever it happens to be, and I think we all have potentially a different platform of choice. That's fine. I'm not here to pick on anybody. How do you mitigate versions for users and use cases for your games?
Okay.
Or apps?
So the first thing is, people, when they think of fragmentation, they immediately compare Android to iOS. And I have to start off with my 15-second mantra. iOS supports 2 or 3 different device types. Android spans from smartwatch to glass to phone to tablet to now PC and gaming console. Again, check back next month there. We'll have a lot more to share. I think Android from an API standpoint has an awesome fragmentation framework, and the middleware industry has been killer at supporting the entire Android ecosystem, and they've taken a lot of pain out of that. So I think the developer tools are critical. There are not very many games that are just completely hard-coded on any platform anymore. They use middleware, they use HTML5, and that takes the pain out, and that allows for the fragmentation to be off of the game developer quite a bit. From our vantage point, it's really, we don't want to fork Android from an API perspective. We're not forking Android from an API perspective. When you hear a lot about Android forks on the platform side, they're not forking the APIs. They're forking the user experience. So for the game developer, I would say it's more about the user experience, the quality of the game in terms of optimizing the graphics, the gameplay for the type of device, and the control aspects. I think when people worry a little bit too much about the APIs and the stuff under the hood.
I think you're speaking to something that probably drove the console market so strongly when it really popped up, is that from the developer perspective, all of the fragmentation on PCs in those days was overwhelming, it was crippling. And consoles provide the idea of, like, I have a standard set of hardware chips that I can really anticipate. And so that became such a freeing thing, because like you said, I don't want to mess with that stuff. And then I think as that problem got solved by middleware and IDEs on PC and Macs again, the same thing, you're starting to see that same resurgence back on PCs, because I don't have to mess with it again. I don't have to think about your graphics card. I don't have to think about all that stuff because it's handled internally.
I think it's interesting coming from the web development world, because dealing with different versions of browsers and versions of those browsers that may support one API or another has been the case for the past 10 to 15 years, right? And so being a web developer and coming to HTML5 gaming, it's like in our blood to develop applications that resize nicely, that make use of features that are available, and gracefully degrade when they do not. And so I think that it's been really interesting coming at development from that perspective, because then the other side of the coin, right, is that you have people on iOS, they only have to develop for one or two. And so I think that the whole kind of paradigm of web development really kind of was ahead of the time. I mean, the web development stack has been called one of the most hostile software development environments that you can have, because there's infinite number of combinations of browsers and versions of browsers, and what operating system are they running on, and what bugs are in this version and that version. And you see the same thing on Android too. There's Android 2.1, and that web browser had this capability and that capability. But a lot of it, like you said, kind of comes down to having solid middleware, and so in the web, that was like jQuery, YUI, all these like Angular, Backbone, all these libraries that kind of make your life easier, flatten the playing field. And for HTML5 specifically, we're starting to see that with these maturing frameworks, maturing game engines, and maturing tool sets. And another thing that we personally do to kind of mitigate that is that, again, I'm going to mention Node WebKit, which is an open source project coming out of Intel. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to wrap our games and distribute them as native executables on Windows, Mac, and Linux. But we also have the ability to kind of target different builds that they provide against certain versions of Chromium. So it's been the case fairly recently that they've had an update where they said, okay, now we're on Chromium 30. And we've said, okay, let's try it out. The performance, we saw a dip, and so we said, nope, we're going to ship with the version back. And so that's a kind of control that we have distributing our software this way that we wouldn't if we were distributing it purely as, say, a URL.
Oh, you're good? Good. Wow, okay. So we're talking about HTML5, and I think we could all agree that it's good, whether or not we use it in a daily routine or for apps. But what would make HTML5 killer for you? And I realize the two of you, Matt and Geoff, have a different
I like HTML5.
Right. You're always
it
going
is
to like
killer.
it. Okay. Okay then for you then? What is one thing you wish HTML5 could do that it currently cannot?
You cannot get fast enough. That's what it comes down to, because we don't really have the same problems we used to on desktop, which is what we're focusing on right now. Like our game, A Wizard's Lizard, was just greenlit on Steam, and so we're coming to like the de facto Steam platform, and we don't have problems anymore of like, how do you interact with the gamepad with HTML5? How do you draw graphics pretty fast? How do you save the data so that people can come back and like have progression through their game? The problems that we have now are like, the game design's not strong enough, or there's not enough content. We don't see any problems anymore with the tech. It's starting to disappear, specifically on desktop. And like I was just saying, it can always be faster. And that's probably true across the board. You can have like the most powerful machine in the world running, Unreal, and they still want it to be faster. That's never going to stop being a request from developers. So it almost feels like it'll always be there. It's always going to be with us. And so when that's our only problem right now, it starts to disappear. Like with HTML5, it is this killer platform for us right now.
I think one thing I'd like to see, and I don't know if this is necessarily the way it'll go or if it's possible, but one of the reasons we target Steam and downloadable games is because that's a traditionally good model for independent game developers like us. We sell the game to you at a specific price, you download it, you have it across platform, you can play it whenever you want. And then you have things like the Chrome Web Store, which is a really interesting idea, but we've personally found that we haven't found our audience on those kind of pure web distribution portals. And so what I'd really like to see out of HTML5 as an ecosystem is a way to kind of, get at that kind of market where the perception is like, hey, this is a valuable piece of software that I'm going to pay for, just like I would if I was on Steam.
So people think I have a big horse in this race because I'm building on an Android platform, and I don't. I think if HTML5 could build its own app store platform and be truly cross-platform like Google Play Games or something, where your save states, your experience transitions from one device to the next, that's fine. I mean, to me, HTML5 is the fuel. We're building an engine. We're building a car. We're building a platform with iConsole.tv. Our goal is to make sure that whether you're building a game in Dalvik or Android Runtime or NDK or HTML5, that it runs the best and that we give developers additional tools, additional horsepower, and additional features. So I don't think HTML5 is not killer now. I think it is what it is, and if it gets better, great. We'll help make HTML5 better on top of what HTML5 does better.
I hope I'm not the contrarian, but I just don't think about HTML5 anymore at all. The reality is that Unity won our attention because they had a development environment that was the easiest to use, and we got good at that environment. Now, whether it spits out to an HTML5 runtime or an exe or whatever else, like that's not really something I think about much. It's a plugin, I just do it. But for us, really, the decision comes down to the pipeline. It's the development environment, and for us, because we got into one particular one and got good at it, it's unlikely for us to change horses anytime real soon. Like we went down the HTML5 road, we went down the Flex and Air road, and they were all good experimentations. They all solved a marketing problem, but we've sort of moved through that marketing question back to a production question, and that's where Unity for us is we're going to be there for a while.
All right, let's jump from that. Go ahead, Max. I think you may be going where I'm going potentially, but what were you going to address? And then I'll jump in.
I don't remember, so go ahead.
I'm so sorry, Matt. Well, I wanted to ask, since you went with Unity, why did you guys go with HTML5 over Unity?
That's what I was going to say,
Oh,
actually.
well, dude, we were
It
on the
came
same
back.
wavelength.
The light bulb. So we've actually talked about this. We audit our tech stack all the time because we kind of we really love our tech stack, but we're aware that it could be infinitely better. Someone could have a tool tomorrow, or maybe Game Maker Studio is what we should be using. Maybe it's Unity. And we've talked about if we didn't have these 2 or 3 years we spent developing tools just for us that we love, they smell like us, they do exactly what we want and nothing else, There's great HTML5 game engines out there, but the one that we've been working on for 3 years is made for us, And if we didn't have that, if we were just now starting, if you're a new independent game developer or whatever, we would probably go with Unity at this point, And that's me saying I love HTML5 and I want to stick with it, but at the same time, it's because we have these great tools that not a lot of other developers have. It's our environment, and it's not even like, even if we open sourced our game engine and we made some documentation and stuff, it's not going to suit your specific needs. You know, it was built just for us and our specific use case. So yeah, there's so many great tools out there. It doesn't really even matter what you use, but we just happen to use and like HTML5.
I just want to kind of follow up on that and say that we've kind of noticed, you know, as we've watched HTML5 mature and the problems that we have as game developers, a lot of it starts to really be focused around how do I make the best game, how do I keep engagement, how do I market my game, how do I distribute my game, and a lot of those aren't technological questions. Maybe distribution, but at a certain point it's more about how do I get eyeballs on my landing page, right? And so I think that HTML5 is a great tool, Unity is a great tool, Pygame is a great tool, and you know, you still see people making games in C++ and SDL and OpenGL, right? And so I think that, you know, game development is just one of these things where you have an environment that suits your pipeline for whatever reason. You've tried some things or you're comfortable with it or whatever. And if that allows you to move quickly and make great experiences for people, then that's the right choice for you.
And I haven't mentioned it, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw up your hand or get my attention in some other way. I was told that I could throw a t-shirt at you, but apparently they don't know. I don't. What's that?
Legal implications.
Well, not just, they've never seen me pitch. It would not, it would end up behind me somehow. It just would not end well. Either way, if you do have a question, we get a nice little t-shirt here. I haven't even seen it. Look at that. Adrenaline, which I think we're all running on or will be by the end of the show. Quite nice. I'd imagine you guys get annoyed at times. I'm curious if there were any. Oh, there is a question. Okay, well, we'll go to the question first, and then I'll come back. Go ahead. Thank you.
So my question was specifically for HTML5. What was the biggest hurdle in the last 3 years for you specifically in your environment? You know, probably more towards programming towards performance.
Are you directing this specifically to Matt and Geoff? Okay.
So Node WebKit, we found about a year ago, and that like solved all of our desktop problems. Before that, we were like, our games lived in the browser and they died in the browser, and our inability to ship it on platforms like Steam, where gamers live, like the vast majority of desktop gamers are. We had our ear to the ground for like 2 years. We knew the technology could exist where you can take an HTML5 game, you can combine it with like the runtime there. There were some other tools that popped up. There was Titanium SDK. There was a similar one that actually branched out of that. There's Air. You can actually use Adobe Air to wrap up your HTML5 game and create desktop binaries from that. It can be done. For us, it was like 2 frames per second. It was a non-starter.
but it could be done.
It could be done. Maybe if you have a turn-based game or something. But that for us was like this holy grail of like, you can now distribute anywhere on desktop. And we were like, oh. And it took a long time to find that. And there were so many different teams over the years working on that same product. It had a lot in common, but it just didn't meet our requirements for one reason or another. So that software coming out and that being a thing that we could use, that solved one of the biggest problems for us. But it sounds like your question was more about optimization. So,
I was just saying that course performance is probably the biggest thing that's been a pain in our rears for the past couple of years. And audio. I mean, audio in the browser has been notoriously terrible, and it's really taken a long time. I think with a couple recent versions of iOS, they've actually implemented the Web Audio API, and that's, mobile audio has been a huge thorn in our side, trying to distribute in the mobile web browser. And of course, performance on the mobile devices is, not as good as it would be on your desktop, and so that's another problem, and the resource constraints that you find on mobile, and that's not something that's, specific to HTML5 necessarily, but when you're developing for these devices, they're much lower power than your Chrome browser, and so you have to keep that in mind when you're writing your code in your JavaScript in your Chrome browser on your desktop, that it's got to be running on these devices that can't play multiple sounds, can't draw more than X pixels per frame and things like that. But it's actually gotten a lot better. iOS 7 implements Web Audio API. The Canvas performance is pretty decent. WebGL is kind of looming on the horizon for these devices too, so that's going to be a huge performance increase. So yeah, that's draw calls and audio, the worst things.
Anything to add? But from the other two, Chris's or not? You good? Okay. So we're gonna wrap it up. But we have one question. Fair enough.
So I can't remember who said it. I think it was Lost Decade guys. Who said that your goal is not to have concordance, essentially write the concordance that should work across all the different devices. Now I think that works for certain kind of games. I mean, Flappy Bird was one example, but I think for other kind of games that would not really work. I mean, Halo, you could not put that on, your rifle, right? So I'm curious about that. When you think about the games, is the idea then to develop the lowest common denominator that works across devices, or is there an opportunity as you look at different devices to, as you're porting, to optimize for the device?
I know for years lowest common denominator was the way we attacked that. It's like, what can I get away with? How can I make this work? But I think these days now that is step one, lowest common denominator is great. But what I really want to do is I want to make it so that each form factor in particular, each UI indication, that they are unique and they make the most out of what's going on. So when I have a tablet and I have touch and accelerometers, in a sweet spot, I can make my game unique to that experience without having to majorly recode it. But I do have to obviously redo the control inputs. But I can make that same game functionally similar, if not exactly the same, whether it's mouse and keyboard, whether it's touch, now with RealSense. Stuff like this, like Stargate is a game you guys saw earlier today. The idea that we have a mouse and keyboard version, we have a touch version, and a RealSense version, and it's essentially the same game, is something that we started to really experiment with and really enjoy. What's fascinating in that process is that we were totally unaware of how much the input changed the experience. And so with RealSense in Stargate, it's just the nature of the UI that it somehow calms the game down, even though everything else about it except my input is the same. It feels really zen. But on my keyboard, it's a twitchy game. I'm like, I gotta get this thing going. And so we found that to be a really rewarding place to invest time.
So one of the nice things about input that's evolved, I'll talk about first input briefly and then performance. 15 seconds on each.
Really quick.
Developers are now hip to that gamers want to do different types of input. They want to use a gaming controller with their tablet and even with their phone, so that dovetails onto PC and other device types very well. I think that's going to be a new common denominator. In terms of graphics, it's very easy to scale if you're using the right tools. I think that's the easy answer there.
Yeah.
Just real quick. Yeah. You have to design your game with these form factors in mind. Like you said, you want to get the most out of the platform, and so you want to make sure you're targeting ahead of time these devices specifically.
Fair enough. Thank you. I was going to end it with the buzzword that you wanted to kill in this industry, but we ran out of time. So that we'll have to follow up with that in personal conversation. Thank you to a wonderful panel, Chris, Christopher,
Thank you.
Geoff, Matt. Thank you.